There's a spice sitting in nearly every kitchen cabinet in America right now. It costs a few dollars. You've probably had it since the holidays, and a growing body of clinical research suggests it may help lower blood sugar in as little as 48 hours. Now, when I first came across this research years ago, I'll be honest, I was skeptical. We all hear claims about foods and spices that supposedly do extraordinary things. Most of the time, the evidence just isn't there. But this was different. This wasn't one small study. This was a pattern showing up across multiple clinical trials in peer-reviewed journals in different countries with different populations, and the findings kept pointing in the same direction. So I dug deeper. And what I found genuinely changed how I think about one of the most common health challenges facing adults today. Here's the thing about blood sugar. It's not just a concern for people with a diabetes diagnosis. Right now, over 96 million American adults have prediabetes. That means their blood sugar is already elevated, already doing quiet damage to blood vessels, nerves, and organs, and most of them have no idea. If you've ever had a doctor tell you your numbers are a little high or that you should keep an eye on things, you may be one of them. And even if your numbers have been creeping up gradually over the last few years, even if nobody has used the word diabetes yet, your body is already responding to that extra glucose in ways you can't feel, but that matter enormously over time. And what frustrates me is how often the conversation stops there. Keep an eye on it, watch your diet, get some exercise. That's good advice, but it's incomplete because there are specific evidence-based tools that can support blood sugar regulation, things that are affordable and accessible, and they rarely come up in a standard medical appointment, not because they don't work, but because there simply isn't enough time in a 15-minute visit to cover them. A doctor is managing your medications, reviewing your labs, answering your most pressing questions, and moving on to the next patient. There's no room to talk about which spice to put in your oatmeal, but that doesn't mean the information isn't important. It just means you have to find it elsewhere. That's what today's conversation is about. By the time we're done, you'll know exactly which spice we're talking about, what the clinical evidence actually shows, how it may work inside your body, explained simply, the right way to use it, the wrong way that could cause problems, and why one specific type may be unsafe for daily use. That last point is something most health information online completely misses, and it's critical. I'll also explain who should be cautious, what realistic expectations look like, and how this one habit may support more than just blood sugar. Let's start with the science, because this is where the story gets really interesting. The spice is cinnamon. And I know, your first reaction might be, cinnamon? Really? I understand that response. Cinnamon feels too ordinary, too familiar to be medically significant. But here's what's fascinating. Sometimes the most powerful bioactive compounds are hiding in the most common places. And cinnamon turns out to be one of the most extensively studied natural substances in the world when it comes to blood sugar metabolism. The study that really opened this field was published in 2003 in the journal Diabetes Care. Researchers took a group of people with type 2 diabetes and gave them small daily amounts of cinnamon. What they found was significant. Fasting blood glucose levels dropped, and it wasn't marginal. The reductions were meaningful enough to catch the attention of the broader research community. That single study sparked dozens more. And in 2013, a meta-analysis published in the Annals of Family Medicine pooled the data from 10 randomized controlled trials and found a consistent association between cinnamon intake and lower fasting blood sugar. Across different study designs, different dosages, different populations, the signal kept appearing. Now, does that mean cinnamon works for every single person? No. The evidence isn't that clean. Some studies showed strong effects, others showed more modest results, and a few didn't show a statistically significant difference at all. That's normal in nutrition research because human biology is incredibly complex. Diet, genetics, activity levels, stress, sleep, existing medications, they all play a role. But when you look at the totality of the evidence, the overall direction is meaningful, particularly for people whose blood sugar is already elevated. And here's the part that I think is especially worth noting. In many of these studies, the people who responded best weren't the ones with normal glucose levels. They were the ones who were already struggling. People with prediabetes, people with type 2 diabetes. The body seems to respond to cinnamon most when it needs the help most. That's a pattern worth paying attention to because it means this information is most relevant to the very people who are looking for answers. But here's where the conversation takes an important turn, because what most people do next, after hearing that cinnamon may help, is exactly the wrong thing. And I want to make sure you don't make that mistake. Not all cinnamon is the same. There are two main types available in the United States, and the difference between them matters far more than most people realize. The first is cassia cinnamon. This is what you'll find in the majority of grocery stores. It's the standard, it's inexpensive, it has a bold, strong flavor, and it's what most Americans have been using their entire lives. The second is Ceylon cinnamon. It's sometimes called true cinnamon. It's lighter in color, more delicate in flavor, and not as widely available on regular store shelves, though you can easily find it at health food stores or online. Here's why this distinction matters for your health. Cassia cinnamon contains relatively high levels of a naturally occurring compound called coumarin. In small amounts, the kind you'd get from occasionally sprinkling cinnamon on a piece of toast, coumarin isn't a concern. But if you're using cinnamon every single day as a deliberate health strategy, the coumarin intake from cassia can accumulate. And over time, elevated coumarin exposure has been associated with liver stress. Ceylon cinnamon contains dramatically less coumarin. Depending on the source, we're talking up to 1,000 times less. For anyone planning to use cinnamon daily, especially older adults who are often already taking medications that their liver needs to process, the type you choose is not a minor detail, it's a safety issue. The European Food Safety Authority actually established a tolerable daily intake for coumarin, and it's surprisingly easy to exceed that limit with cassia cinnamon if you're using it every day in therapeutic amounts. Most people have no idea about this. They hear cinnamon is good for blood sugar, they go to the store, they grab the first jar they see, they start using it generously, and they never realize they may be quietly increasing their coumarin exposure to levels that could become problematic over months. So here's the practical takeaway. If you're going to use cinnamon regularly, look for Ceylon cinnamon. The label should specifically say Ceylon or list the botanical name Cinnamomum verum. If the label just says cinnamon with no further detail, it's almost certainly cassia. Ceylon is widely available online and at most health food stores. It typically costs a few dollars more, but for something you're using daily, that small difference is well worth it. Good. Now let me explain how cinnamon may actually work in the body, and I want to keep this straightforward because the mechanism is elegant in its simplicity. When you eat, your body breaks food down into glucose, which is the sugar your cells use for energy. To move that glucose from your bloodstream into your cells, your body relies on insulin. Think of it this way. Insulin is like a key, and each cell has a lock. When insulin arrives, it turns the lock, the door opens, and glucose gets inside. The problem that develops for many people, particularly after the age of 50, is that those locks start becoming resistant. The key still shows up, but it doesn't turn as easily. So glucose stays in the bloodstream longer than it should. The body responds by producing more insulin, trying harder, but the system becomes less and less efficient over time. That's insulin resistance, and it's the core driver behind prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. And here's what makes this so frustrating for so many people. Insulin resistance doesn't happen because you did something wrong. It's influenced by genetics, by aging, by stress, by sleep quality, by years of dietary patterns that you may not have had any reason to question at the time. It's not a personal failure, it's a metabolic shift. And once it starts, it can feel like your body is working against you no matter what you do. That's exactly why tools like cinnamon are worth understanding, not because they fix the problem entirely, but because they may help nudge the system back toward better function. What the research suggests is that certain bioactive compounds in cinnamon, particularly one called cinnamaldehyde, may help improve how your cells respond to insulin, not by replacing insulin, not by forcing anything, but by helping those locks work more smoothly again. Essentially, cinnamon may help your body do what it's already trying to do, just a little more efficiently. It's a subtle effect, but even a modest improvement in insulin sensitivity can translate into a measurable change in blood sugar levels. And for some people, that change may begin to appear within days. That's what the 48-hour finding is about. Not a miracle, not a cure, but a real physiological response that clinical research has documented. And for someone who's been struggling with numbers that won't budge, even a small shift in the right direction can feel significant. Now, here's where most people miss an important detail, and it has to do with timing. Many people who start using cinnamon just add it randomly throughout the day without thinking about when it might matter most. But some research suggests that consuming cinnamon with a meal, particularly a meal that contains carbohydrates, may have a greater impact on the blood sugar spike that follows. Think about what happens after a typical dinner. Pasta, rice, bread, potatoes. Your blood sugar rises. That's normal. But for someone with insulin resistance, it rises too high and stays elevated for too long. That post-meal spike is one of the most damaging patterns in blood sugar dysregulation, and it's something many people experience every evening without realizing how significant it is. If cinnamon can help blunt that post-meal spike even modestly, then taking it with your largest carbohydrate-containing meal may be the most strategic approach. For most Americans, that meal is dinner. So stirring half a teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon into your evening tea or adding it to whatever you're already cooking is a simple, practical way to align the timing with where it may do the most good. You don't need to overthink this. You don't need to create an elaborate system. Pick one meal, make cinnamon part of it, and be consistent. Consistency is what matters far more than precision here. I hear from people frequently who say they've been sprinkling cinnamon randomly throughout the day, a little in their coffee, a little on a snack, a little at dinner, and they're not sure if it's making a difference. My suggestion is always the same. Consolidate your use around your main meal. Give your body a focused dose at the time when it may matter most. That's a smarter approach than scattering small amounts without any strategy behind it, and this leads naturally to the question of dosage. How much are we actually talking about? The clinical trials that showed meaningful results generally used between 1 and 6 grams per day. That's roughly half a teaspoon to about 2 teaspoons. But here's what I think is worth emphasizing. Most of the studies that demonstrated clear blood sugar improvements used the lower end of that range, around 1 to 1.5 grams. That's approximately half a teaspoon to 3/4 of a teaspoon daily. More is not necessarily better. This is a principle that applies broadly in nutrition and medicine, and it absolutely applies here. I've come across recommendations online suggesting tablespoons of cinnamon a day. That is not what the research supports. Higher doses don't appear to produce better outcomes, and they do increase the amount of compounds your body has to process. There's a reason clinical researchers test specific amounts. The goal is to find the dose that produces benefit with minimal risk. And for cinnamon, that dose appears to be quite modest. Starting with a small, consistent amount is far more valuable than using large quantities sporadically. Think about it this way. Half a teaspoon every single day for a month is a fundamentally different intervention than 2 tablespoons on Monday and nothing for the rest of the week. Your body responds to consistency. That's how metabolic adaptation actually works. Half a teaspoon a day, that's a reasonable, evidence-informed starting point. Give it 2 to 3 weeks, and most importantly, track what happens. This brings me to something I feel strongly about. If you're going to use cinnamon with the goal of supporting healthier blood sugar, please measure your blood sugar. Without data, you're simply hoping. And hope is not a health strategy. A basic glucose meter is available at any pharmacy for about $15 to $20. Check your fasting glucose in the morning before eating. Check it again roughly 2 hours after your main meal. Write it down. A simple notebook works perfectly. Do this consistently, and within a couple of weeks, you'll have a clear picture of whether cinnamon is making a measurable difference for you specifically. That kind of personal data is extraordinarily valuable. It transforms a vague feeling of, I think this might be helping, into concrete evidence you can actually evaluate. And it's the difference between a vague conversation with your doctor and a meaningful one backed by actual numbers. When you walk into an appointment with 2 weeks of blood sugar data showing a clear trend, that changes the dynamic of the conversation entirely. Your doctor can see what's happening. They can make informed decisions. That's how you become an active partner in your own healthcare rather than a passive recipient. And speaking of your doctor, I need to say something clearly because this point is non-negotiable. Cinnamon is not a substitute for prescribed medication. If you're on diabetes medication and your blood sugar starts trending lower after adding cinnamon, that is a positive sign. But the appropriate response is to share that data with your healthcare provider and let them determine whether an adjustment to your medication is warranted. Making that decision on your own, particularly with insulin or sulfonylureas, can lead to dangerously low blood sugar. Hypoglycemia is serious. It can cause dizziness, confusion, shakiness, and in severe cases, it can become a medical emergency. The right framework is to think of cinnamon as a complementary tool, something you add to a comprehensive approach, not something you substitute for medical care. Now, here's something that I find genuinely exciting about the cinnamon research, and it goes beyond blood sugar, because one of the things I'm always looking for when I evaluate a food or a compound is whether it offers what I'd call multi-system benefits, meaning it supports more than one aspect of health at the same time. And cinnamon appears to do exactly that. Several studies have found that regular cinnamon consumption is associated with improvements in lipid profiles, specifically reductions in total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol. Now think about that for a moment. If you're over 50 and managing blood sugar, there's a very good chance you're also watching your cholesterol. These two conditions travel together with remarkable frequency. So the possibility that one simple daily habit might support both is a genuinely compelling finding. It's the kind of efficiency in a health strategy that I always find encouraging. There's also a growing body of research examining cinnamon's potential anti-inflammatory properties, and this is something I think deserves far more attention than it typically receives. Chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the most underappreciated health challenges affecting older adults. You can't see it, you often can't feel it directly, but it's there, operating quietly in the background, connected to an extraordinarily wide range of conditions: joint stiffness, cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, even certain cancers. The links between chronic inflammation and these diseases are well established in the medical literature. And while the research on cinnamon and inflammation is still in its early stages, the signals are promising enough that serious research groups continue to invest in understanding it. What's remarkable to me is that cinnamon has been used medicinally across cultures for thousands of years. Egyptian, Chinese, and Ayurvedic healing traditions all recognize something about this spice long before we had the clinical tools to measure it. What's happening now in the scientific literature is, in many ways, modern research catching up to ancient observation. And when thousands of years of traditional knowledge and modern controlled clinical trials start converging on the same conclusion, that's a signal I pay very close attention to. Now, before we wrap up, I want to address something important: safety considerations. For most healthy adults, cinnamon in reasonable daily amounts is safe, but there are specific groups who should exercise caution. If you have liver disease or compromised liver function, discuss daily cinnamon use with your healthcare provider, even if it's Ceylon. Your liver is already working hard, and adding any new daily compound deserves a conversation. If you're pregnant or nursing, stick with ordinary culinary amounts. This is not the time to begin a daily supplementation routine without guidance from your obstetrician. If you're taking blood-thinning medications such as warfarin, be aware that cinnamon may possess mild anticoagulant properties. This doesn't mean you can't use it, but it does mean your doctor should know about it so they can monitor appropriately. And if you're on diabetes medication, especially insulin or medications that actively lower blood sugar, adding cinnamon may amplify that effect. Now, that sounds like a positive thing, and in many ways it is. But if your blood sugar drops too low, that creates its own set of problems. Symptoms like shakiness, dizziness, confusion, sweating, and rapid heartbeat can all signal hypoglycemia. And in serious cases, it can become a medical emergency. So if you're on medication and you begin adding cinnamon to your routine, check your blood sugar more frequently during the first 2 weeks. And if you notice your readings trending meaningfully lower, bring that information to your healthcare provider. They may want to adjust your dosage. That's a conversation worth having, and it's a sign that something positive is happening. These cautions aren't meant to discourage you. They're meant to help you use cinnamon intelligently, the way any evidence-based tool should be used. Let me share one final thought because I think it ties everything together. One of the most important concepts in health, and one that I think gets overlooked constantly, is the idea of stacking small, sustainable habits. We tend to look for the one big answer, the one pill, the one diet, the one thing that changes everything. But that's rarely how lasting health improvement actually works. What works is accumulation. A teaspoon of cinnamon with dinner, a walk around the block after eating, a glass of water instead of a sugary drink at lunch, an extra 30 minutes of sleep, choosing a handful of nuts instead of chips in the afternoon. None of those individual actions is going to revolutionize your blood sugar overnight. But layered together, practiced with reasonable consistency over weeks and months, they create a cumulative effect that can be genuinely transformative. And here's what's fascinating about this process. The benefits don't just add up, they compound. Better sleep improves insulin sensitivity. Better insulin sensitivity means your body handles meals more effectively. When your blood sugar is more stable, your energy improves. When your energy improves, you move more. When you move more, you sleep better. It becomes a positive cycle, and it often starts with one single decision to do something different. The people who make real, lasting progress with their health are almost never the ones who made one dramatic change. They're the ones who made 5 or 6 small changes and stuck with them long enough for the benefits to compound. Cinnamon fits perfectly into that approach because it asks almost nothing of you. A teaspoon and 30 seconds of your day. That's it. But it can be the catalyst that starts a much larger shift in how you relate to your own health. And I think that's ultimately what this conversation is really about. It's not just about cinnamon, it's about recognizing that you have more influence over your health than you may have been led to believe. The food you eat, the way you move, the small decisions you make every single day, they send signals to your body, and your body is listening. It's always listening. The question is whether you're sending it signals that support what you want or signals that work against it. Something as simple as choosing the right type of cinnamon, using it consistently, and tracking what happens, that's you sending a deliberate positive signal. And when you see the results start to shift on your glucose meter, that's your body telling you it received the message. Cinnamon is an ideal starting point. It's affordable, it's accessible, it's backed by real evidence, and it requires almost no effort to incorporate into your daily routine. That's a rare combination. And for someone looking for that first step, the thing that makes them feel like they're doing something proactive for their own health, it's hard to think of an easier place to begin. So here's what I'd encourage you to do. Check your kitchen, look at your cinnamon. If it doesn't specify Ceylon on the label, consider picking some up. It's a few dollars. Add half a teaspoon to your dinner or your evening tea. Start tracking your blood sugar if you aren't already. Give it 2 honest weeks, and then look at your numbers and see what the data tells you. If this kind of practical, science-based health information is valuable to you, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe to this channel. I regularly cover topics like this, things that sit at the intersection of food, science, and everyday health decisions, the kind of information that can make a real difference in how you feel and how your body functions as you get older. You deserve access to this knowledge, and you deserve to feel like your daily choices actually matter, because they do, more than most people realize. Thanks for watching, take good care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.